Hello. That can stay there. I may make it slightly smaller. Hello. Let's see. My hair is okay. That's fine. I don't need to be fancy. It's Friday. It's nearly the weekend for many people, except for the people for whom the weekend is a working time, and then it's less the weekend. I have had a pretty good week. I I have things I can complain about because the world is not yet maximally awesome and there are bad things actively happening, but not all fights can be fought all the time all at once. It's pretty impossible to do everything all at once. Unless you are the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. But in that case, the challenge of trying to do everything everywhere all at once is part of the narrative. I do recommend the film if you haven't seen it. It's pretty good. It's sillier than I expected it to be. I think in the promotional material I saw, I did not get the sense that it was going to be silly in a way that it is, which I am deeply grateful for because I love that a lot. So I have tweeted out that this stream is going to happen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take us over to a Google Doc, and I'm going to talk about game design and some things that I kind of want to do with this idea and what I'm drawing from, and as much of what I wrote down previously as I can remember, because this is me trying to reconstruct a game design idea that I had probably last year or maybe early or late 2021 when I was first getting into reading and understanding this game, Heart: The City Beneath. Heart is the game that Friends of the Table used for their kind of weird Western series Sangfiel, which aired, I think, 2021 into 2022. And yeah, I think it finished before January. They've been kind of in the off season for a bit. So it's an interesting game. We are in an era of kind of the beginning of a new wave of heroic fantasy games because of all the OGL stuff and the incoming rules update to D&D 5th edition, which will make it sort of D&D 5.5, even though the WotC folks, the official spokespeople, will never call it that because of their own reasons, and they're welcome to call the game whatever they want. But because of the OGL stuff, and especially because of the recent revelations that allegedly, I say to cover my legal butt, allegedly, including some reporting, the Pinkerton agency had been hired and sent to a Magic the Gathering player's house to intimidate them into returning cards that they bought legally from a company that had accidentally been sent something that was had been sent Magic cards that weren't supposed to be released yet, because the title is almost identical to the previous set, which has already been released. Because Magic comes out with a large number of sets every year, and mistakes happen. Understandably, sometimes stuff gets out there into the world fast or earlier than you want it to. And Hasbro probably decided that the thing to do was to send the Pinkertons after someone. If you are not familiar with who the Pinkertons are, perhaps because you are from not the United States, or just because you are not familiar with that part of labor history, I will refer you to a lovely recent podcast episode by Dungeon Master of None, which is a TTRPG, mostly D&D, but not entirely D&D podcast. They have a strong and lovely leftist historian perspective on gaming and on history, and they did a great, really well-researched episode on the Pinkertons, the Pinkertons' history overall, where they are now, and the story about the Pinkertons and this Magic the Gathering player. So I do recommend that to get some additional context for the Pinkertons if you're not already aware of them to the point where you can say, fuck the Pinkertons, which is where I am. So that's that. The WGA strike continues. I send all of my love and support to them. We have the I Stand with the WGA card here. I will figure out where to move it once we are into game design itself. And next week, Thursday through the following Monday, I will actually be in Anaheim for the 2023 Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Association Nebula Conference. The Nebula Conference used to be an awards weekend with a little bit of programming around it, but in the last decade has become really a full-fledged professional development conference where there's a lot of different programming options for, I want to learn about self-publishing. I want to learn about writing for comics. I want to, learn interesting things in particular subject areas that are, related and would be useful for writing science fiction fantasy, but I haven't gotten to do the research. And so we bring in experts, and there's some pretty cool stuff going on there. And this year's conference is the first time that the Nebulas will be in person since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm expecting that the attendance will be fairly low overall because, one, it is an expensive convention for a variety of reasons, partially the location, and two, because COVID is not over. Having gone to Big Bad Con in October, which had a very good COVID mitigation policy and worked closely with the hotel, and to everyone, as far as everyone knows, in a convention that had several hundred attendees, there were no confirmed COVID transmissions during the convention itself because of these mitigation policies. And that's fantastic. So I went to that con. I did not get sick. I went to PAX Unplugged in December, which was a much larger event, tens of thousands of people. Masking required, proof of vaccination required. I was only there for like 2 days and a little bit of a third day before coming home. I didn't get sick after. And so I feel pretty okay about going to conventions that have strong COVID protocols, especially when when I know what I'm going to the event for, more easily when it's a smaller event, so in the hundreds of people instead of the thousands or tens of thousands of people, because it's just a smaller number of people in whatever the space is. And I bought myself a portable air purifier, which arrived yesterday. And I have some replacement filters, though, as I've learned from reading the instruction manual, I probably won't need those filters for quite some time, but I just wanted to be sure. So I'm going to be able to take that air purifier with me on the plane, in the airport, in any rooms with panels if I feel like it. Potentially take it with me to like the bar at the hotel, so that if I'm hanging out and understandably people are eating or drinking and removing their masks to do that I feel more comfortable being around that, participating in that. And I'm just going to do my best to protect myself and my colleagues that I'm traveling or that I'm there with, and every other traveler that I come across. And I will see what happens. So that is that. Unfortunately, Valaword is not happening tonight. Let's see. Do I have a Valaword command? I do. So we're going to have some... we've had some scheduling challenges with Valaword, and so our next session is scheduled for May 19th. And we should be able to play then. We're going to have a little bit of a cast change due to the things that happen in people's lives, and try to continue that. We should have a Speculate broadcast Sunday night with a one-shot that we will be recording tomorrow night with the Strange Friends, if we get to do that. And then that will broadcast on Sunday, and that'll go into the podcast feed for the next few weeks. We have been talking a bit about what next longer-term thing we want to do for the Strange Friends, but a lot of the Strange Friends have been very busy. People have had a variety of life transition things and stuff that folks are dealing with, and for right now, one-shots are great for us, though it's a little bit harder to build momentum because each thing is more its own thing. But it means we're getting to try out games that we'd been hoping to try, and we're getting to look at and share a variety of games with one another to talk about things that we're interested in playing, and that's all been really fun. And then so that's over the weekend, and then next week I'll be doing my normal packing and prep for a convention, sticking a whole bunch of hardcover books in my suitcase, and then having them around to be able to to make use of at the convention. And I'm really excited for the Nebulas, not just because the Nebulas are usually a good convention on their own, since I've started going, was since the kind of programming became more fully fledged, with Mary Robinette Kowal really leading that charge, along with a lot of people who make the Nebulas go. And that's folks have kind of been following through on that and trying to build on it and figure out what works, and everybody bringing their own different style. Another thing I'm really excited about is just meeting new colleagues who have come into the field in the last few years that I just haven't gotten to meet because, they recently started selling books, or they recently started coming to conventions. They recently started selling short stories, or they're only now deciding that they want to, attend the Nebulas or, come to conventions in this space. And these are folks who have already been working and in some cases probably writing for a number of years. But now they are, they're more active in the space for whatever reason. And I love meeting new people, hearing about how the experiences that folks are having working with publishers, and I'm working with this editor who, is newer to the field. And then I get to learn about, how they approach things, what types of stories they like, potentially getting to meet people who work at the big five publisher imprints in science fiction, fantasy, or other imprints, and getting to know, editors are the ones who most frequently go to conventions, but sometimes you get publicists and, folks who work in marketing or maybe sales. Since I spent a lot of time working on the publisher side and the staff side of publishing as well. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for eating outdoors in May in Southern California, which I'm hoping will be pretty easy. And if the timing lines up, I may actually on Monday morning get to travel in to kind of LA area and see if I can spend a couple of hours pitching in at one of the picket lines that the WGA has. I have heard from people that, some additional support and, people coming by is appreciated. I've got a little bit more research to do there, check in with colleagues, see if anybody else wants to go so that maybe we can do some kind of carpool, split a car, take a train, transit, somebody who drives locally, figure out that kind of logistics, because getting places around LA can be very difficult because it is car central and traffic can become really bad. And I know this from having traveled to Southern California a number of times over the course of the past 15 years. So if I can get out to one of the picket lines and say hi to people and, spend some time in the line and kind of materially, locally support those efforts by participating in the action itself, that would be pretty amazing. But I can't guarantee that's going to happen. And so right now it's instead of I want to go to Disneyland during this trip because it's Anaheim and Disney is like a very short walk from where this hotel is, because I imagine people use this hotel as a base for going to Disney. I did Disney in January. WGA strikes ideally don't happen very often. And though I'm not a WGA member, I am an aggressive supporter of the work that they do on behalf of writers everywhere, and the display of organization that they've kind of put forward, and their strong stance on AI/machine learning programs, and the role that honestly mostly executives would probably like them to have in the creative works, which is use machine learning algorithms, fire a bunch of workers. And that's not okay with me. As the Kids Are Asleep says, corporations keep looking for new ways to force a gig economy instead of steady jobs. 1,000%. And WGA people have talked about their demands and the situation in those terms, because a lot of the things that the networks and production companies are pushing on and pushing toward is the gig economy, the gigification of writing for TV and film. Shorter contracts, freelance work instead of employed work, and all those kinds of things. So I'm just going to pull up the WGA strike HQ website again. Actually, I guess I just go to the WGA site. This is what I did last time. Yes. Because if you go to WGA.org, they have a tab that is the 2023 WGA Strike Hub, which has a bunch of information. What's at stake, the WGA's proposals, the rules of the strike, ways that you can provide strike assistance, picket schedules and locations, and ways to show solidarity and support, along with a couple of other things. So that's that. I'm going to put this in here. That is WGAcontract2023.org/strike-hub. So check that out if you want to get more information about this strike and what's at stake, what people are fighting over, and ways that you can help. Then that's there. And I would be very grateful. If you do that, I would love to hear what you are doing to kind of get the word, spread the word, support the workers, and anything like that. I've seen some good indications of solidarity across guilds and unions in the entertainment industry, which is really heartening. Because I believe Screen Actors Guild has their negotiations like later this year. And so there's going to be, a lot of the topics that are going to come up for SAG are going to be the same topics as WGA. So ideally, those guilds will be able to support each other. So that's that. It's your labor minute. Should I just have a labor minute every stream? Maybe. I don't know that I would do the research to have a new labor minute every time I do a stream, but I am myself. I think the real question is, would I do enough research to have something new to say in terms of like labor news? That I would probably fall off of. Can I spend 1 to 5 minutes talking about labor every time I stream? Absolutely. It's already on the Mike Underwood stream bingo card that the Kids Are Asleep made. So that's that. Now I'm going to go over to my, let's see, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to studio mode, and then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to add a window capture, and that will be the better way of doing this. And then I'm just going to adjust that a bit, and I'm going to move in here, because when I work on Google Docs, there is a big chunk of white space. And I will do this, and then I will do this, and here we are. That looks like it is about where I want it to be. Okay, cool. So now we've got chat on this side, we've got the WGA thing on that side, we've got the text in the middle, and here we go. So first I should explain what it is that I'm even doing. Excuse me. So what is SBR? SBR is stands for Sparked by Resistance. That is the core system that powers Heart, the City Beneath, Spire, The City Must Fall, which is the game that comes before Heart. Heart has in fact been called a sequel game to Spire. So Spire is about revolution in this big mega city Spire. If you know Sharn, the City of Towers, Spire is a bit like that. Heart is a dark fantasy horror game in the same setting, but below the city. And below the city, there is a red, wet heaven, as the designers call it. And so Heart is a dark fantasy / action horror, like dungeon delving game with very high lethality. And the system it uses is the resistance system. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works for context, and that'll make this a better kind of long-term video document talking about game design. The reason why I'm using this is that I think the system is cool, and Heart is already a game system that I think you could use to play the kinds of fantasy adventure stories that a lot of people use Dungeons & Dragons to play. I had previously talked about how I think you could use Heart to play the Dungeon Dudes Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign that is written for 5th edition. I also want to make sure to say that Heart is a game by Grant Howitt and Christopher Taylor, which is illustrated by Felix Miall. And I'm going to find the copyright page and shout out a couple more names. It is edited by Helen Gold and Maz Hamilton. Layout and design by Minerva McJanda. Produced by Maz Hamilton. And it was published in 2020. It took me a little bit of extra time there because the names in here are actually not they are not current names for the individuals who made, some of the individuals that made this game. And I wanted to make sure to take a moment to remember the name to use so that I don't have to go back in and make edits, because wherever possible, I want to make sure to use the right name. I don't know that for those folks, they would necessarily refer to these other names as dead names, but I'll take the extra moment just to be sure. Do the best I can to be respectful. So there's Heart. I like Heart. I have run Heart once. I ran it last year for ArvCon in the as the Games with Scientists. Oop, let's not do that. That's exactly in the wrong place. So you got a very brief glimpse of my Google, of my YouTube. I don't think that's going to be a problem though. So I'm looking up the last Game with Scientists video so that I can link it here. So that is this over on YouTube, which was a really great time. And I have listened to or watched quite a bit of actual play of Heart. Some including, some from Friends of the Table, some from RPPR, Role-Playing Public Radio, and a little bit of other stuff here and there. And I've listened to all of the basically like DVD extras podcasts that Howitt and Taylor did for Heart, which are really cool, especially as somebody getting into game design. And so I've spent a decent chunk of time thinking about Heart. And what I really like about Heart is that it is a fiction-first kind of story forward, very collaborative, fairly rule or not very heavily crunchy rules made game, but it has interesting combat options, and especially with Heart, what I find to be a really cool exploration mode mechanic called the Delve system. So in Heart, when you're traveling between kind of landmarks in this ever-changing underground world that like slowly but inevitably becomes more and more malleable and weird, and like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation-y, or like The Zone in Stalker / Roadside Picnic. So when you're moving from like place to place, you do a delve. And when you do a delve, the GM will kind of describe what the overall journey is going to be like, and then present the players with like, okay, so you do this, and we do a little bit of travel montage, and now you find yourself at the edge of a gorge. It's about 50 feet across. You know that the train line that you're trying to get to, you can get to really easily beyond this gorge. You just have to get to the other side of this room, but there is nothing between you and over there. However, there are some like hanging cables up here. There's like skittering monsters on the wall, and they all like have wings and can fly. And so the GM describes a situation that's going to take some work to overcome. Like, okay, here's an obstacle to your forward progress. How do you get across? And then the players look at their abilities and skills and say, oh, okay, well, I have, I have this skill. I have the coerce skill. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ability that lets me speak to animals, and I'm going to convince those big bugs to fly us across. And so you'd make a roll and see if it works. And every time you make a roll in pursuit of overcoming a delve, if you get a hit, if you get a success, you will roll a die and apply that much quote unquote damage to the delve. And so that roll, and then roll dice for stress to apply against resistances, is the same system in combat as it is in exploration. And so if you have a superior tool that would help you delve, that tool lets you roll a bigger die. If you have a big weapon, that would let you roll a bigger die compared to if you just punch somebody. And so equipment interacts really beautifully with the core systems, because in a lot of cases, if you succeed on a roll, then you've succeeded and you do the thing. When you find yourself in a situation where one success may not necessarily be enough to overcome an entire challenge, because you're fighting somebody who has like a total of stress that they can take, or you're dealing with a delve that has a certain amount of stress, it's kind of health total effectively. And this is a little bit of a middle ground between hit points in something like D&D and clocks, progress clocks in Forge in the Dark games. It's not quite either of those things, but it's in that vein. And I like the idea that, okay, well, this character over here is not great at combat, but what they are great at is delving, because they've got this cool like pneumatic spade, and they've got like multi-dimensional goggles that will let them read, traces of magic and the presence of the divine and see in the dark. So you can have cool gear that's about delves, that's about being able to traverse dangerous locations and dangerous paths. And you can have cool weapons that are things that you can use to be more effective and more powerful in combat, where you might have a weapon that it only does a d6 stress, but you roll 2d6 and pick the higher die to do stress. You have a greater chance of doing at least an average amount of damage, right? Because when you have multiple dice, the results curve or the results spread moves toward a curve, as opposed to when you have a single die, you have a linear result spread. That being because if you have 1d20, there's a 5% chance that you roll any given side of that die, right? Because you're rolling one die, 20 sides. If it's properly balanced, it's a 1 in 20 chance of any given result. If you're rolling two 6-sided dice, we start to get like regression to the mean, where your results are most likely to be a total of 7 and a total of 8. And then you're slightly less likely to get a total of 6 and a total of 9, and so on and so forth. You're least likely to get, 1, 1. You're least likely to get a 2 and a 12. This is kind of how, this is the way that statistics operates within TTRPG game design under this model. I'm not an expert in statistics, and people can pick nets and whatever, but this is the aegis under which I am operating in this conversation. So having this overland travel, dealing with dangerous journeys system feels to me like it's a great thing to bring to a D&D type story, where if we're looking to Lord of the Rings for inspiration, so much of the Lord of the Rings is going on journeys, right? It is the Mines of Moria. It is Caradhras, that, the snowy mountain. It is tracking the orcs to rescue Merry and Pippin. It is, making Frodo and Sam and Gollum making their way through the dangerous, like, blasted lands of Mordor. Travel is really important there. And in a lot of epic fantasy that draws heavily from Tolkien, and a lot of the epic and heroic fantasy that's kind of in that vein, even if it's not actively drawing from Tolkien, and a lot of this includes the kind of history of Dungeons and Dragons, that overland travel, long journey, dangerous journey, strange environs, that vibe is in there. And for my money, the overland travel, like, danger and encounter systems in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons are not as clean and satisfying as what I feel like you can get from the way that Heart does it. I think, again, that if you wanted to read Heart and learn some lessons from it, you could probably bring those back to whatever fantasy adventure game you want, and you'll have some cool stuff to utilize. But the thing that I want to do is see if I can make a game that is still fairly similar to Heart, but instead of being dark fantasy horror, is explicitly heroic fantasy. And so it's not sword and sorcery. So it's not Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. It's not Conan. It's not focused on the, like, dungeon delving OSR type mode where life is cheap and you want to do everything you can to avoid combat because everything is more powerful and is going to murder you. I'm more looking at the kind of stuff that that people see in, like, major fantasy actual play campaigns. Group of heroes, they become more powerful over time. There's a strong focus on character arc and the relationship of the group. They fight, a variety of monsters and travel to amazing, fantastic locations, grow as people and face a large scale, fantastical, big bad, or participate in some kind of grand story that defines the fate of nations. Full-on epic fantasy, heroic epic fantasy, where you are adventurers. So, like, less important is I'm Prince such and such. The Game of Thrones end where it gets way more political. I think maybe you could do politics here, but maybe I would want to do something else anyway. So now to this document that I have. So that's a fair bit of preamble. Let's just be really clear. Objectives. Create a heroic fantasy RPG that focuses on fiction first storytelling, character progression, and exciting, dangerous journeys. Heroic fantasy RPG that focuses on fiction-first storytelling, character progression, and exciting, dangerous journeys. There's a little bit of what it's not. What I want it to not be is a tactical... I don't want it to be a war game. I don't want it to be a tactical combat game. When the OGL stuff was blowing up, I, like many people, took another look at Pathfinder, specifically Pathfinder 2nd Edition by Paizo. Pathfinder, I think, has a lot to recommend it, but Pathfinder is also a tactical combat game where a lot of how the RPG is designed is specifically oriented toward combat, and there is design technology for non-combat stuff, but it's a much smaller percentage of the design philosophy and requires slightly more diverging subsystems. Again, a thing I really like about Sparked by Resistance is that this resistance system where if you succeed, you roll a die, you apply stress, that stress is applied against resistances if you're dealing with a player character, or is applied against the resistance of whatever your obstacle is, whether that is a creature of some sort or it is, you're doing stress to a delve to kind of represent gradually overcoming the danger posed by this exciting journey. Cinematic, not tactical. And I add this to be specific and to give me clear contrast to some of what other publishers are doing. MCDM, founded by Matt Colville, the kind of mostly known for GMing advice on YouTube, MCDM is working on their own RPG that doesn't look like it's going to be an open role-playing game, creative license game. It's not going to be an orc game. I don't think it's going to be an OGL game. It looks like they're doing something that's a bit more different. And one of the phrases that Matt uses most often when talking about what they want to do is a game that is cinematic and tactical. I don't know that I'm the best person to make a tactical RPG, because tactical RPGs are not necessarily my favorite thing. I want a game where I can have exciting, dramatic combats that are memorable and are thrilling for the players and the GM, where people get to come up with awesome ideas, express who their character is through their abilities and their choices, and where all of the action scenes earn the time that you spend on them. Because in a lot of versions of D&D and in a number of other games, combat gets really slow. And that even with a bunch of streamlining work and really close attentiveness by all the players involved, there's just a lot of stage business around combat that does not add as much to the experience for me to justify the amount of time that I spend on it. And again, this is very much an individual aesthetic choice. But we're at the point in RPGs now where you can make something with a really specific aesthetic agenda and maybe find an audience, because there are enough games now that people can look for the game that does exactly what they want to do. If we get to the point where there have been fantasy heartbreakers, which is part of why this is titled Breaking Hearts. Also, Heart. Shout out to my friend Dan Lehman Kennedy, who is also working on something in this vein that they have just called Heartbreaker. So I don't know that I'm doing exactly parallel to what Dan is doing, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. And if then it turns out that I am doing something pretty parallel to what they're doing, then, we'll talk. We'll either trade tips or something else. Working together could be fun, but I know Dan has a lot of things going on. So, Heroic Fantasy RPG focuses on fiction-first storytelling, character progression, and exciting. If I could condense this down into one word, that'd probably be great, but that's fine. This is a first draft. So pitch. Heart minus horror plus heroic fantasy equals winning. Right? Because heart has action and horror. So I'm going to take out the horror and add heroic fantasy. And we're sort of in that territory, is what we're looking at. So in a Sparked by Resistance game, you're going to have resistances. You're going to have skills. You're going to have domains. Resistances are the different stress tracks that your character has. So in Heart, those are blood, mind, heart. Is it actually heart? It's been long enough that I'm just going to remind myself here. Resistances. It's echo. Okay. Blood, echo, mind, fortune, supplies. I don't know why mind is before fortune, because otherwise it's, if mind went after fortune, it would be alphabetized. Whatever, doesn't matter. Just going to make these easier to distinguish from one another. So Heart has 5 resistances. I believe that Spire does as well. And so I think to start, I'm going to aim to have the same number of skills, resistances, and domains as Heart does, because I have found that in Power by the Apocalypse and Force in the Dark design, the proportionality and granularity of these different systems is very conscious. It is intentional. Having 5 different stress tracks means that you get a different relationship between like total stress, because every time you take stress, you roll a check against the total amount of stress that you have, and if it's above the amount of stress you have, you're fine. If it's below the amount of stress you have and below this number, you get one thing, and if it's below but it's above that number, then you get this other thing. So you can have mild and more severe consequences, as basically the stress adds up and then something breaks bad for you. My intention in this game is to make it so that the minor fallouts, which is what happens when you fail a resistance check. I guess it's a fallout test is the technical term. When you fail a fallout test and you get a minor fallout, I want all of those minor fallouts to be all temporary, fleeting, scene-oriented. And what I mean by scene-oriented is it's about the scene that you're in. So a mind fallout might be confused. A blood fallout might be staggered. You're not going to be staggered in the next scene. You're just staggered temporarily in this scene. And so, you know, if you're fantasy adventurers fighting skeletons and you're fighting a skeleton and you make a roll and you fail and the skeleton like gets a hit on you and you take a fallout for blood, that fallout is more likely to be staggered, toppled, isolated. These are like temporary conditions that are more like negative temporary aspects in fate than they are, you know, bleeding, you know, broken wrist. Like, I don't want things that are longer term. I want to see if I can have minor fallouts all be modifications to how you exist within the scene, within the fiction. And then the larger fallouts are the ones that are medium term to longer term. And that way we can have the give and take of a fight where taking a couple of hits does feel like it creates problems for you. But because this is heroic fantasy, characters can keep going through a number of smaller and some medium term setbacks. What I've heard and found in Heart and Spire is that the design intentionally creates a death spiral. Fallouts stack up. You're more likely to get more fallouts as you have fallouts, and the characters tend to burn themselves out. And that's a tone thing, because Heart is inspired by, you know, dark fantasy stuff, including Darkest Dungeon and things like that. If we're drawing on heroic fantasy, I don't want a death spiral like that. I probably want death to be really narratively driven, where, you know, we might build up to the highest levels of fallout, and one of those fallouts could be, you know, last stand. And if the player agrees to accept that fallout, then we say, okay, this character is going to die. But taking the fallout last stand means they get to do this cool heroic thing. And then we know they're going to die at the end of the scene. And they're going to get the chance to kind of say their last words to the group, or they are going to, you know, they're going to hold the pass so that everybody else can escape. And they're going to get to be a big hero, and then they're going to die. That's the type of like lethal fallout that I'm thinking of. And when I said if they accept this fallout, I think this is where I am raising the question to myself of, when does that conversation happen? Is, okay, you're going to take a fatal fallout, whatever I end up calling it, because in Heart it is minor, major, critical. Critical fallout always takes a character out of the game, or almost always, more or less. Critical fallout, I don't know. I might have 4 levels of fallout. I might have minor, major, critical, and then whatever I call that last term, like final fallout or climax fallout, so that the decision to take a character to the point where they are going to leave the game because they've died, or they're going to get written out, or they are lost, or they turn to the bad, you know, to the evil side or whatever. I want that to be a conversation between the GM and the player, where the player is like, oh, I think, you know, maybe the GM asks like, oh, is this where this character dies? Is this the, you know, their time? And then the player can say, no, I don't think it's their time. I don't want to do that. And then we have a system for there still to be consequences for whatever has gone wrong that would have given that character that lethal fallout. But the conversation about characters' fates is a conversation, and the player has some agency. This automatically pre-selects for a certain playstyle. If you are a player and you go into a game and you say, yeah, actually, absolutely, there should be lethality, there's consequences for your actions, but then that player never, ever, ever entertains the idea that that it could be time for their character to die, that's a mismatch of expectations and calibration. If I'm using this new game, especially to play Dungeons of Drakenheim, and everybody's like, yeah, we're going to do dark fantasy, but we like this rule set better for whatever reason. Character death, absolutely on the table. People are going to have to make sacrifices, and then we get later on and nobody wants to do it. That has to represent an overall table change in perspective. If you have that disjunct where everybody is on this page and then somebody's on that page, and the conversation can't be reconciled, then you have a problem. So I want that kind of a vibe. The game that I'm guessing is probably going to be close to this in terms of like tone and adventure stuff is Daggerheart, the Critical Role game. I'm going to adjust some things here because it looks like I'm actually cutting off the very bottom. Nope. Yep. So there's more here than I thought. And okay. All right, now this should look better. Great. I just part of the text got cut off. Pitch, and then let's go add touchstones. Heroic fantasy with travel. So Critical Role, NADPOD, the Adventure Zone balance. I'm guessing that Daggerheart, that Darrington Press, the Critical Role game company, that Daggerheart, as they've talked about it, is probably going to be doing some of the same things, but I'm guessing they're not going to do it the way I'm doing it because I don't think they're going to use Sparked by Resistance. Maybe they will. I don't know. They've said very little about it. I have seen effectively one paragraph of text about Daggerheart. So it's still far out there. And honestly, making a game that's scoped to try to do something pretty similar to that, I don't feel like that's a problem because how you do it is as important as what you're trying to do. And that's going to fit different people's aesthetics. All right, so that's that. So Resistance is Blood, Echo, Mind, Fortune, Supplies. So Supplies is kind of the dungeon delving, gets to the dungeon delving aspect of Heart, where one of the supplies fallouts that you can get, let me go and find my fallouts here. Yep. So critical supplies fallout, pitch black, unable to see, you are dragged away by darkling creatures, never to return. Or starvation, or your line snaps, your hooks don't hold, your pick shears away and tumbles into a chasm. Whatever it is, you plunge into the darkness beneath and do not return. So that's like your gear running out of, okay, your last torch goes out, the line snaps like they said, starvation, that has its own like content note stuff. So I'm not necessarily going to focus on that. For me, that's not necessarily a heroic fantasy thing. Being worried about your supplies in like a survival video game mode, I feel like those challenges can show up and there can be challenges there, but I don't know that it's as central. Now, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't keep having a supplies type resistance. It might just mean that, like when I was talking about blood fallout, a minor supplies fallout might be, you dropped your torch. It might be you slip on the line. It might be, the thing, like the item that you had in your hand, like slips or breaks or is knocked out of your hand. And that's the minor fallout. And we shift the scope so that, those critical fallouts that we listed would be that fourth tier of fallout. And so it takes a lot of work, a lot of the characters getting beaten down over time and not having the chance to recover to get all the way there. So maybe that's fine. Echo is going to change because Echo is about the heart. And so we're going to call this Arcane, maybe. But honestly, it might just be magic stress. Blood, I think, is going to change to body. Mind might stay mind. I'm very conscious of the fact that some of the mind fallouts and some of the discussions around mental illness in Heart are not necessarily what I would want to do. But I think there is some utility in being able to differentiate between you have been knocked over as a minor fallout and you've had your bell rung and you're currently not able to focus. Or, you are being, you're being haunted by a spirit in your mind. Maybe this gets collapsed into magic and that it's like basically physical maladies, including mental and magical fallouts. So that's possible. I think I'm probably going to have reputation stress instead of fortune, like bad luck. Fortune might get collapsed into what in Heart is supplies. It might be body, magic, mind, reputation, fortune. And because in Heart, fortune stress is like you just get unlucky, right? I'm going to pull up some fallouts because that's, for me, the best way of illustrating what the designers were trying to get at. So, critical fortune fallout. You get exactly what you want, but it's too good to be true. The stress is too much for you to bear, and your only worth now is as a warning to other delvers to not take things at face value. Or, wrong place. You accidentally take a fatal blow meant for someone else. Or, you act with unearned confidence and your hubris is rewarded with an ironic death. So that's that type of ending is maybe even more out of tone with what I'm doing. I think the hubris one is maybe fine because you can get that that type of Greek mythology heroic hubris can sometimes find root in heroic fantasy, depending on some variances. So reputation, because if you're adventurers, your reputation is really important. Having a reputation stress also helps discourage murder, like murder vagabond behavior, where the characters don't care about the implications of their actions and they, run roughshod over the everyday people of this world because, they're just NPCs. And so you can have, you can take stress to reputation. You start you're in a town and the town is attacked by zombies. If you burn down a building to kill all the zombies that are within it, even if there are no living people in that building, you might take stress to reputation because you burned down a building. Maybe it was necessary, but it still impacts that community. Or you might take reputation stress if you try to convince like the blacksmith to cut you a big deal, like to cut you a deal on like enchanting your armor or whatever. And if that goes poorly, you might take stress to reputation, where that smith then goes around and be like, yeah, these adventurers, they think they can just walk all over us. So if our resistances are body, mind, magic, reputation, and supplies. Okay, so an option, if we drop mind, is we could have fate. Fate instead of fortune. Because for me, fate is capital F, fortune is small case f. You are fated to die an ironic death, right? Fate as an agent in the world, where if you tempt fate, if you thumb your nose at fate too often, then fate puts their fingers on the scales of reality, and fate, your fate comes for you. That to me feels more like heroic fantasy, high fantasy, than the way that fortune is framed in Heart. Right? So if we put these in alphabetical order, because that's what my brain wants to do, we have body, fate, magic, reputation, and supplies. And I don't know about supplies. We might fit that into something else. So if we can get to five resistance tracks, that's probably great. Another option is we could have a fellowship stress that is about stresses to the party, the adventuring party. And so you might like, oh, okay, well, you're going to take stress to fellowship because, you're climbing up this mountain and this one person keeps messing up their knots. And that kind of stresses other people in the group out. So like fatal level fellowship fallout is Boromir turns on the fellowship. Boromir is tempted by the ring and attacks Frodo trying to get the ring. Right? Because the GM of this game, of the quote unquote the game of Lord of the Rings, was really focused on redemption, Boromir takes that terrible action and then tries to, or like comes to his senses long enough to die heroically trying to protect other hobbits after he's driven Frodo away. So that could be a critical fellowship fallout. This is a little tricky because there are chances for it to impinge on player agency, but I'm going to leave that there as an idea because I can always bring back in the resistances from existing games. And so if I can make it so that these resistances are more distinct, they feel more tuned to what I'm trying to do, that makes me feel like I'm on the right track. And then maybe I'll change it. That I did like 90 minutes of design on an idea like this last year. Like I said, I lost that document. It's a bummer. We're going to get probably 90 minutes to 2 hours of work in here. So this is not, I don't have to do the whole thing in one go. It's not that kind of game. There's no way I could. Yeah, rip to that doc. I feel like, I don't know that I'll be able to recreate everything that I had, but I don't think that my ideas there were so good that they can't be treated as fertilizer for what I'm talking about now and moving forward. So I'm just going to write out the skills from heart. And then we're going to kind of try the same thing and either replace them or rename them. Hunt. Kill. Kill is probably going to be one that I rename at least. Mend. Sneak. Okay, so those skills are compel, discern, endure, evade, hunt, kill, mend, and sneak. Mend is your healing skill, but it can also be mental and not just physical. You know, your party's cleric could mend the troubled mind of the rogue. You know, by sitting with them, holding their hands, you know, in their lap and telling a comforting story. That could be a mend roll to try to alleviate the stress or maybe a fallout of the thief character. Kill could maybe be subdue. Yeah, I think that's pointing in the right direction. I imagine that whatever the combat skill is will still sometimes or perhaps often involve fatal combat. But I think kill is a little bit too tweaked toward violence. So, you know, this might become skirmish. Or it might become battle. Mend. We could have soothe here. Let's see. Do you soothe someone's wounds? I don't know that you do. You soothe might soothe someone's, you know, like, you know, you could soothe their mind, but I want one that's more holistic. We could just have heal. Or we could go from mend to tend. Not sure about that. Some of these I might leave for now because it's just going to be a question of like going to thesaurus.com, because I don't believe in the Sparked by Resistance kit, which is the like, here's what we're going to tell you that we're fine with you using from our design. I don't want to run afoul of that, but I don't have to worry about it yet because this is not publication. This is design. I will go back to refer to that kit and make sure that I'm operating in good faith. And if there are questions, reach out to Rowan Rookendecker, the company that makes these games, to see if, you know, see how they feel about whatever it is that I might be doing that is not 100% explicitly within this kit. Because there is a point at which there are only so many words for some things. In the Genrenauts RPG, I changed the wording of most of the actions, but I don't think I did 100% because there have been enough Forged in the Dark games now that for me, the best words to do some of the types of things are just in one or another of the games. You know, I think evade is a great term because it can be a dodge skill. Well, it probably don't want it to be a sneak skill, but evade can also be the there's a trap. Can you evade the trap? You didn't notice the trap. The trap gets, triggered. Do you evade it? As well as, do you evade the orc's sword when they're attacking you because you inadvertently stumbled into their sacred grove and they were having a ritual and understandably are angry at you because you're an interloper? Let's turn around those expectations about the roles that orcs play in fantasy adventure games. I'm playing a character who is an Unia, who are people of mixed orc and elf ancestry in a Exandria-based game, and that character is cool. She rocks. So compel, might become convince. I believe convince is the term that I have in the Genrenauts game, so maybe that's just me. You know, some of these could be renamed to D&D type skill names, right? Convince can become persuasion. I think a crafting skill in here somewhere is probably pretty good. I guess mend is probably, that's the upside of mend, is that you can use it as a crafting skill. But let's see. I think maybe I leave these. Notice or perceive. I think perceive I also have in Genrenauts, so whatever. Because discern is great because discern can be perception, if we're using D&D terms, right? Perception, investigation, and insight. Do you perceive someone's mood? Because this is, 7 skills? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 skills. D&D 5th edition has 16 skills, something like that. I'd have to open D&D Beyond, and I don't want to do that right now because it doesn't matter in a big way. Domains. So your characters have skills, and they also have mastery in domains. Domains are kind of modes of being in the world, modes of the world. So I'm just going to read off the domain names from heart. Cursed, desolate, haven, occult, religion, technology, warren, and wild. These are basically biomes. So we could have desert or deserted, and then desert can be deserted. Ruined. Let's see. Barren. Okay, barren is not on the list. Barren, ruin, city. Let's see. Weird, wooded, coastal, watery, aquatic, just thinking about like biomes in fantasy adventures. City, pastoral. I could have a pastoral domain. It's like, the pastoral domain is most of the overland travel in the Lord of the Rings, the book, and the Lord of the Rings, the film, right? The Shire is largely a pastoral area. It's still pastoral, getting almost all the way to Rivendell. We could have like secluded, cozy, yeah. Maybe secluded or secreted or hermit or something for like spaces that are not meant for you, but you're traversing into them, right? And then I probably want to have something that's basically dungeon. What was the term? Like someone's had like, okay. So I want the reverse of the idea in D&D type RPGs where lots of things can be dungeons, even when they're not literally dungeons. But I want to go beyond. So Dungeons of Drakenheim is described as like a mega dungeon, and so the whole city is framed as a dungeon. And it's not a whole city that is where prisoners are kept in a castle, which is like literally a dungeon. But then dungeon gets expanded to, a tomb is a dungeon. A a cave system is a dungeon. But I want something that conveys, most of the stuff that you do in an OSR game is this domain. OSR being old school Renaissance, that is basically, my take here will be new game design with streamlined rules to play RPGs in a mode that feels like early editions of D&D, high lethality, sword and sorcery, resource management and survival elements are important, and things like that. How many is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I have 9. Which of these do I not necessarily need? Baron and Ruin maybe don't go together, because Ruin can also be dungeon. I can leave this like this because dungeon is like in parentheses, and I might drop secluded, right? Because city might turn into settlement. So I can just have my notes here, right? Secret, hidden, let's see, wild, right? Because wooded might be too narrow. A little bit, I would love for these to feel like they could make good favored terrain for the ranger type character. Like, oh yes, well, I'm an expert in, the aquatic domain, the domain of the aquatic, right? I'm an expert in delving into ruins. So maybe that we can do something there. The way that domains work is if you know the domain of the place where you are when you're trying to do something, you're automatically going to be better at doing it because you're used to doing all the adventurer stuff in that domain. You've got kind of local knowledge. You know where to look for things. You're probably more experienced with the creatures of a place. You know how to move around in that place. So like a cut purse thief type character is almost guaranteed to have the settlement domain because they're used to moving through like a settlement, a city. They know how to move through streets and things like that. A ranger is maybe like your classic ranger is going to have the wooded domain, but you could have like a coastal ranger who has the aquatic domain. If you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna be a merman, like a triton, but with feet. So I have the aquatic domain. I'm an elf wizard from the hidden grove, and maybe I have the secluded domain or the secret domain or whatever that is. I'm a barbarian, and therefore I have the baron domain because my people come from the steppe equivalent in this world, and something like that. So different classes will give you different domains to start, and then there's special abilities that will give you domains. And so to do a roll in a Sparked by Resistance game, you say what you want to do, and then the GM will say, give me this roll. So if my thief is trying to pick the pocket of the noble and steal their signet ring, if they're basically trying to burgle the signet ring from a noble, well, they're in a city, so they need the settlement domain, and they are trying to sneak. So the GM will say, give me a sneak settlement roll. And so then the thief character, the player of the thief goes, okay, well, I have the settlement domain, so I add 1d10. I have 1d10 to begin with, and I have the sneak skill, because this is what I do. You always have at least one die, and these are 10-sided dice. And then you add 1 if you have the relevant skill. You add 1 if you have the relevant domain. And then sometimes you can get a bonus die from something. If someone is helping you, if you have what is, I think they're called knacks. Yes, knacks. So if you get if something gives you the skill, if something gives you a skill and you already have that skill, you can take a knack in that skill, which is a specialization. So this thief character might have a knack, might have the settlement domain and the sneak skill, and then they have a knack for pickpocketing. And if they had that knack, they would get 1 bonus die for that. So they could have 4d10. You build your dice pool however much it is, and then you roll, and there's a chart. And I think the chart is 1 to 5 is just a failure. A 6 and 7 is success at a cost. An 8 and 9 is full hit. And then a 10 is a critical success. And then a 1 is a critical failure. So you roll your dice and you look at your highest die. So if I roll 3d10s and I get 2, 5, 7, my highest is a 7. That is the mixed success result, which is like a 7 to 9 in Powered by the Apocalypse. So you get some of what you wanted, but there is a consequence. And in Heart, difficulty is expressed by removing your highest die. So if you were trying to take the signet ring not off some like Fail Sun Prince, but off of like the High King of this magic kingdom who is like in his prime and, lauded for his savviness. Okay, that's going to be harder to steal the signet ring off of his finger. Also, maybe it's like warded. So you can say, oh, this is risky. You're going to make your roll, look at your results, and then if it's risky, the GM takes away the highest resulting die, which is pretty rough. And then if something is dangerous, the GM takes away the 2 highest dice. In Spire, instead of taking the highest dice after the roll, difficulty reduces your die pool. Based on the way that I understand and think about math, the Spire difficulty modifiers are less brutal than the Heart difficulty modifiers. So I might have the Spire difficulty modifiers be the default, and then there's another mode of difficulty that maybe removes your highest die, right? So there's different ways of scaling difficulty. I'm just going to write that down because I have this document here. Move dice before rolling, a la Spire. Maybe highest difficulty setting is remove dice after rolling. Right? So something might be risky 1 and you lose 1 die before you roll. Something might be desperate 1 where you lose 1 die after your roll. And so that gives the GM different ways of introducing difficulty. So maybe risk is about this thing is, one of them could be this thing is harder to do, and the other one is circumstances are weighing against you. So you might, and I have to figure out which way I want to do it, but you could differentiate. You are trying to run along rooftops when in the middle of a torrential downpour. That is, circumstances are making this harder, versus you are trying to run up a wall. That's just plain harder to do. And so maybe that I can G8 between basically environmental factors, penalties, and things that are just harder to do on their own. And maybe that could work. I like that idea. Trying to differentiate in that way. So gear, like items in Heart are especially important. You have resources that you can trade at locations to basically get other gear or to get healing to your stresses. Where, you go down into the first level of the Heart, you fight this monster, you kill the monster, you harvest some parts of it that maybe people use for cooking or something. So we're like, okay, I killed this monster and I get D6 rattlebug shell. Like, oh yeah, people use rattlebug shells for like, as a bowl. They'll just clean it out and then that's a bowl because a rattlebug is like this big or whatever. A resource would have a domain. So like, okay, a rattlebug shell is like a D6 barren resource because rattlebugs are found in barren locations. And then when you get back to a settlement, you might go, okay, well, I have this minor blood fallout that I need to get healed. And I'm going to trade this rattlebug shell to the cleric at, the cleric at this temple. Barter economy, stuff like that. I like the resource and barter economy because I don't like tracking wealth. That's not very interesting to me. In heroic, like if I'm looking at some of these heroic fantasy touchstones, the amount of gold that anybody has is not a super relevant thing, right? Like, to some extent, this is a reflection of like kind of Tolkien's aristocratic bent, like kind of pro-aristocratic bent, we can argue. So I wouldn't want to like bake that in, but I do like the idea of not having to worry so much about like precise amounts of money. Because even if a character is adventuring because they want wealth, they probably want wealth so that they can have something. Security, legacy, whatever it is. So one thing that we need is drives / callings. So I'm also working on a Shield and Crocus game using some of this. I don't think that I will actively work on both of those. I'll probably pick one to move forward on. Shield and Crocus has the advantage of a really specific setting that's already developed, but I've run into a little bit of a challenge because the shields in Shield and Crocus are like, their abilities are largely because they are great at doing what their kind of inborn species traits let them do. We have a character who's a telepath and a telekinetic, and they're really good at that because they come from a species that communicates telepathically and uses telekinesis because they are physically not as, they don't have as much strength or dexterity as some other species, because that's new weird. And in a new weird, you have, greater differentiation between sentient species in a lot of cases. That can be a challenge for some people. So maybe I don't want to do, I don't want to focus on that. So maybe I don't do Shield and Crocus. Maybe I have Shield and Crocus be a setting book that I release for whatever this game is. If I get that far, who knows? So in Heart, callings are, why are you down here? It's a bad idea to be down in the Heart. Like, if you chose to be here, you've got to have a really good reason. And so the callings are, oh, well, you're down here for adventure, or you're down here to get, because you've been forced to be here. You're like, you have a debt or something, or you're down here because you're seeking some answer, some information. Your calling is enlightenment, or you have heard the Heart song. The Heart has like beckoned you like a siren to come down here. And that's like, there's like 4 or 5 callings in the core book. So callings and drives what I would look at is what motivates heroic fantasy characters to become adventurers. Right? So there would be like glory, meaning, wealth, revenge, right? I was thinking like discovery or like self-discovery, self-improvement, but I think that can also be meaning. And so 1 to 2 more. Because I think maybe, does glory encompass just like, I want to go and see the world and have exciting experiences? So maybe not, right? Maybe it's excitement is different than glory, because glory is about status. Excitement is about enjoyment. Excitement or discovery, maybe. Discovery could also maybe be meaning. But the thing that you use callings for is you determine your character's beats. And beats are a cool progression system that is also sort of like stars and wishes. So your character who has an adventure calling might have a beat that they could take that is kick somebody off of a high ledge, they deserved it. Because that's a type of thing adventurers do, is they kick people off of high things that deserved getting kicked off of a high thing. These are kind of almost like they're narrative structure tropes. And I think that can be really cool. And I think there's a way of doing that for a heroic fantasy that is basically build your own character arc, because the player gets to pick what beats they want next. Characters can have 2 active beats. When you hit a beat, you get to take an advancement. You get to take a special ability based on the scope of that beat. So you have minor beats, major beats, and zenith beats. If you fill a zenith beat, you get your zenith ability, which is like a campaign ending ability for your character. I might have 4 tiers of feats, of beats for your advancements. Another cool thing about beats is because you pick them ahead of time, the GM can refer to those beats as prep, and they should, because each of those beats is the player saying, I want this for my character, or I want this for our group. I want to be in a situation where my character can kick somebody off of a high place, and that person deserved it, because that's the type of adventure I want to have for my character whose calling is adventure. So for this game, if I want it to be like what Daggerheart is trying to do and be the kind of game where you can play this for 3 years with the same characters on a long, slow arc of progression, where, in D&D, if the characters level up every 3 sessions and they go levels 1 to 20, that's 60 sessions. Many campaigns, or most campaigns, don't get to level 20. A lot of people talk about D&D kind of getting rougher to do after like level 13 to 15. So if you do 1 to 13 and it's 3 sessions per level, then that's about 40 sessions. If you're playing for a week, if you're playing every week, that's less than a year. If you play 5 sessions for every level, and maybe it's not linear, right? You play 10 sessions at level 12, and you've played 2 sessions at level 1, but I don't want to have to do that, like that math. 5 per level for 13 is 65. Okay, that's over a year. Say you miss some sessions, maybe you're into a year and a half. It's been quite some time since I played a long-term D&D game that has spanned levels like that. I'm playing in a West Marches type game mostly with other authors, other writer folks of various types, and we're all now, or like the people who are active are levels 7 through 9, more or less. And that game started last August, but because it's West Marches, not everybody's playing on the same schedule. But, playing since August. Most players are playing at least once a month. So August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, 10 months. Let's say maybe people are playing twice a month. So that's 20-ish sessions. It may be less than that. But it has felt like a long arc game because we also do a lot of between game stuff, like in downtime. So there's some callings. I was expecting to do more with classes, but we're at an hour 40 and I am getting a bit creaky. So, and my throat is a little dry. So rather than taking a break and then trying to go for 2.5 to 3 hours, I think I will probably wrap up pretty soon because I've also reached kind of the end of a mode of, thank you, the kids are asleep. So I have classes. The goal with classes would be come up with a cool name for D&D classes. And I don't know that I want to have all 12 classes, the core 12 classes from D&D. Steel Warden is basically a fighter. Scoundrel is a rogue. Avenger is a paladin. I think I would want Wizard. I might have one kind of arcane magic user type class, and then have Bard, which are sometimes arcane magic users and sometimes not. Cleric, Barbarian. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ranger. Right? So if we're using the new stuff, like the one D&D has like class domains, fighter and barbarian are marshals, rogue and bard are, I guess, rogue, bard, and ranger are all expert classes. Cleric, wizard, barbarian. So the other ones are druid, warlock, monk. I'm just not going to have monk be monk the way that monk is. Even WotC is going to change monk to be less like odd class out orientalist. But I think mostly I don't want to design 12 classes for this game. If I can do 7, that'd be great. So some of that's going to be collapsing a couple of classes together. So maybe there is basically a class ability tree that will let you be a ranger. Monk is just unarmed paladin without a god. Yeah, I'd buy that. And I would also buy monk is a dexterous fighter who doesn't use weapons, or who mostly doesn't use weapons, right? Like, what are the big differences between a fighter that specializes in unarmed combat and a monk? It's mostly Orientalism and mobility. So maybe I can do Steel Warden is fighter and ranger. Scoundrel could even be rogue and bard. Avenger could, maybe we have, maybe I collapse paladin and cleric together, and one of the ways that you can take cleric is a more paladin one, right? More active physical combatant versus magical combatant. Ranger and druid could maybe be together, or maybe barbarian is just a subsection of Steel Warden, right? So we could have Steel Warden, Scoundrel, the holy type, the arcane magic type, the nature type. So like druid and ranger maybe are the same class, the same class / playbook. And that's 5. 5 is not bad. I would rather get to 7, because then if you have like heroic fantasy TTRPGs, when they do actual plays, often have a large party, right? They're 6 to 8 players. And so if that's my vibe, having 7 classes is better than 5 because otherwise we might have more duplication, and maybe that I would want to have breadth within each class / playbook so that you could have 2 Steel Wardens in your group and they feel really different. Because you have class, you would also have your calling, you might have background / heritage that gives you some like mechanical and fictional differentiation. So let's do background, heritage, and upbringing / training. Right, so Tales the Valiant is doing a split between physiological / physical heritage, like traits that you inherited, and your upbringing / your background, right? Human raised by dwarves. You have dwarven cultural traits because you were raised by dwarves. You have human physiological traits, is one of the ways that has been broken apart. And there's a whole big conversation about this within the like fantasy adventure design ecosystem, right? WotC used species in one of the one D&D playtests because they had been workshopping and said they want to sunset the use of the term race. I'm not going to weigh in on that more than I already have because we're trying to wrap up. For thoughts on that, I would encourage you to look to the works of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color creators in the TTRPG space. So, Drives Calling, We didn't do much with Fallouts. Thought a little bit about classes. Talked about Sparked by Resistance overall, so that if I do more of the streams for this project, or even if I jump over to Shield and Crocus, we've got some of that background established. We thought about objectives. We gave ourselves a pitch. We talked a little bit about touchstones in terms of where this fits in the design and like narrative ecosystem, and talked our way through some resistances, skills, domains, and things like that. So I think that's going to be a stream for today. I will have to come up with some other title. I don't need to do that yet. It's fine. If this was interesting to you, I have done other game design streams that are on my YouTube at, let's see, is this on bio? If it's not, I probably should. So youtube.com Mike Underwood. I'm just going to make sure that that's actually right, because the YouTube, my channel name on YouTube is a little bit different. Sorry, it's just not, nope. Okay, well then I'm going to go back and just, I don't have enough subscribers to get the fancy URL. So this one will get you there. So that's me. And I'm on Twitter at Mike R. Underwood. If you're here because it's game design and not because you already follow the stuff that I do, then there's some information for you. And thank you for coming and for watching. Thank you to the kids are asleep for hanging out and chatting, as well as everyone else who came by to watch while I was talking. And thank you to folks who are watching the VOD later on Twitch or on YouTube or wherever it is that you're finding it. I do recommend checking out Heart, the City Beneath, which is this game right here. That is my primary inspiration in terms of Sparked by Resistance design. And you can check out all that stuff that Rowan Rook and Deckard does. They just released the Die RPG based on the Karen Gillan, Stephanie Hans comic series, which I've read some of and was very cool. So that's going to be that. Let's look at Twitch and see if we want to raid anybody. Not that there's a whole ton of us here right now, and that's fine. All right, we'll pass on that. So I think we're just going to say farewell. I hope you all have a lovely evening or whatever good time that is ahead of you based on when you're watching. Thanks.